Of course, everyone knows we were supposed to be out Linden Hall, running around the yard as Linden Hall Mansion, and then going inside. But they're making the movie Milton Hershey, the life of him and his wife. So we're stuck here in our little society, but that's okay. That's okay. The last week we were down at 12 Oaks Restaurant in Brownsville, and all the streets were closed, and we thought they were repairing a bridge, but here they were shooting part of the movie down there at that time too, for the Hershey story. So it ought to be very interesting. They had some nice pictures on TV the other night of Linden Hall, so I was happy to see that. But nevertheless, we're going to review a few of the little towns around here. And I've heard it said before by Bill Levergood, who was a member of our society and a very benevolent man to our society and to the area. He said at one time, it's Galley towns like Atlantis, it's the lost city. So Galley town didn't last a whole long time, but it was very productive when it was there. But I'm going to first start back in 1871. We're going to talk about Alexandria and Bloomington, which is Vanderbilt and Dawson. That was their names before they were changed. Now, the 1871 Alexander Hill, he was a very prominent businessman, but he had very large tracts of ground and all over from Dunbar clear into Vanderbilt and what they called East Liberty. East Liberty, of course, is where the old Liberty School is, and so on and so forth. And so he proposed to run a railroad. He knew that the coal and coke business was growing, and he proposed to run a railroad from the Dunbar area into Vanderbilt and down to the P&LE Railroad, which wasn't there quite yet when he proposed this idea. Mr. Hill worked diligently to do this. He had much insight on the project, and so he knew this was going to happen. So he actually got the ground together that he was going to sell for the railroad area, and getting it together, he decided that he would make it into lots. He would go into right above what they call East Liberty, across the bridge. He would go into East Liberty, in the hollow of East Liberty, and he would make the railroad there from the P&LE Railroad yard at the foot of the base of Dickerson Run. The efforts was thwarted, you might say, for a while. It did happen right away, and he was very sad about this, but he at least took a piece of ground on one side of East Liberty, and he made it into building lots. He sold the lots very readily. The lots were sold, houses were built, businesses came, and he named the area Alexandria. And he named this, and like 1871 actually is when he named the town. And it was long deferred, and then the plans happened, and then the railroad came into fruition at that point in time. In the early 1880s actually, of course, James Cochran and his band of merry men and all their associates were buying up all the land they could for the coal and coke business. And so they purchased over 100 acres of coal in the vicinity of Alexandria. It was called the Clarissa Coke Works. And if you notice we used to have signs, I guess there's still a few up, but they would say, "Welcome to Vanderbilt," and they would have the names of the mines. And if you notice, they're like Clarissa, Florence, they were all women's names or women of the Cochran family. That's how they named their mines. A railroad was needed, though, the mines was out in what they called the Nellie area, and it was the Clarissa mines, and they had the coal tipples and everything out there, and they were all ready to go for business. They needed to run a railroad, though, down to the main line in Dickerson Run, right below Dickerson Run Hill. They needed to run this main line down there to process the coal and the coke, taken up to the Clarissa Works. So they were working on this idea, and they ran into an obstacle. They started to dig from the P&LE side, the south side of the Youghiogheny River, and they started to dig up through the little valley there. And you know where you turn into Vanderbilt Cemetery, Dickerson Run Cemetery. Right there, there's a series of buildings. And that was a planing mill at one time when we were young kids. And it was a planing mill, and that was all massive rock in that area. So James Cochran had his workers, and they dug by pick and shovel and mules and horses and took the dirt out, and they dug a tunnel from the P&LE clear up there past the fulling mill, or the planing mill rather, and then out to where Sweet Peas is where it ended up, the railroad ended up. They did this all by hand. It took 18 months to dig the hole so they could get the track laid. Also, while digging up just years, how many years Sweet Peas has been there, but there was always a stream that ran by there, and we were not really, considering that there could have been a mill or something like that on that stream. But when they dug this foundation for Sweet Peas, they found the fulling mill, the grinders, the rocks that would grind the flour. And so actually, they didn't want them. And so a gentleman from Vanderbilt that took it and used it as a coffee or an end table for his poolside ventures, But there was a fulling mill there. There was enough water coming down through that creek to run a mill as well. The coal and coke in 1882, the P&LE branch was set in, and then the branch, of course, it blossomed out to the other areas and going out to the acreage in Alexandria. The P&LE Railroad at the south side of the river, it was built to Clarissa Works, and then it was all done by, as I said, pick and shovel, and it took 18 months to achieve. Now, the Vanderbilt at the time, that it was in its heyday as a during the coal and coke business, it was suggested that the town of Alexandria be named Vanderbilt in honor of W.K. Vanderbilt, a railroad magnate from New York City, or had his offices in New York City. And he actually worked with Mr. Hill, and they planned the railroad, the rest of the railroad way, and they finally got that all together, and it was all connected up to go to the various mine sites. Now, they changed the name. They actually changed the name because of the post office, because that's what they did then. Instead of changing a whole town, they would just change the mailing address or mailing name, and they felt that it was too confusing. Alexandria, there was too many, so why not Vanderbilt? A bunch of guys sitting around a potbelly stove in a store in Vanderbilt decided that, so that's how they had their board meetings, I guess, a long time ago, which was kind of interesting. The name was officially changed to Vanderbilt in 1885. At the time it was changed, there was 52 businesses actually in the town. There was 4 doctors and a dentist, and I'll get my papers here straight. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. And there was various merchandising stores and so on and so forth. It was a very productive town, and they had their own bank, of course. They had the bank, and in the bank they had a steamship office, actually, which, who would ever think you would, make a cruise or pay for a cruise in Vanderbilt or Dawson. But the banks had a steamship office, and the office was the main one was in the Vanderbilt Bank. And actually, Mrs. Cochran, she made bought tickets for her nephew Lucian Smith and his wife for their honeymoon cruise on the Titanic. So they didn't fare out too well. Lucian Smith lost his life, but the actual tickets were made or taken and bought here in Vanderbilt. We still have since we moved, I can't find anything anymore, but we still have the leather pouch that the tickets were in for the steamship company. And it has the steamship company of Vanderbilt, PA. Now, we're going to move across the river now to Dawson. And in 1777, Captain Joseph Houston, he was from Virginia, and he took claim to a very large tract of ground in this area, part of which later became the borough of Dawson. Captain Houston gave a portion of the land for burial purposes and was the first one to be laid to rest on this land, and of course it's now known as Cochran Cemetery today. Now, John Smalley took some land over in 1789, and the land was, he called the area Prospect, PA. And he had it surveyed, and then finally John Smalley was the main man holding on to a lot of the enterprises here in Dawson. Lumbering was the main thing in Dawson, the main work. Not coal and coke at the time it was founded, but they lumbered, and they had a very large lumber mill at the end of town down where Phil's nightclub is, in that area. And they made, they sawed the lumber, they made keel boats for the Cochrans to take their sand and glass and so on to the various foundries in Pittsburgh, and then finally hauling the coal and coke down the river as well. The coal and coke, of course, made the entire area all wealthy, not only Dawson, but Vanderbilt, Dickerson Run, and so on. Dickerson Run was kind of left out of the picture in many ways, but it's interesting facts about Dickerson Run. My father-in-law had a printed history, and there again, I can't find it yet, but I'm looking for it. And Dickerson Run, or East Liberty, as it was called, over where the school is located, that was called Devil's Quarter. Simply because at one time there were 6 speakeasies in the small area of Liberty, East Liberty. And I thought that was kind of amusing because there's not a whole bunch there. Also on the corner where the house is falling down, it's a pile of brick now, and you go, as you're going to Vanderbilt, you'll see another house which was the druggist that was in town, Mr. Bigley. And then there's a big Victorian house, which unfortunately it has been all redone, sided, so on and so forth. But that house was an interesting house because they had a plating mill, of course, in Dickerson Run down in the Holla, and it was owned by F.E. Ogilvy and McClure Company. And they went to all the trade shows all over the United States. They were a very large company. And they were at the Chicago World Fair in 1893. And they saw that Victorian house. Now, it was truly a gem before it was remodeled. It had a library and so on. And it's funny because the girl that lived there became a librarian. It was kind of odd. But nevertheless, it was bought by the company, Ogilvy McClure. They bought the house. They brought it back by railroad, had it disassembled out in Chicago, brought it back, had it assembled there, and put it up for sale. The Allen family bought it, Henry Allen, his wife, and 2 daughters. And like I said, it was a lovely house. A lot of windows, but a beautiful house. So I think that's a remarkable thing to bring a house back at that point in time. And of course, in the town of Vanderbilt, Dickerson Run, and Dawson, they had one company. It was F.E. Reed Brothers, and the Reeds were movers, house movers, and building movers. They moved anything that was loose, I think, and they moved the Bryan Church when it was here on the lot at Dawson. They moved it out to the country on rollers and teams of horses, never disassembled, just pulled it out on the road. They did a lot of office buildings. They moved them from side streets and so on in Vanderbilt in its early day as well. So moving buildings was not a real complex thing here. They even moved the very large parsonage, or used to be the parsonage, across from the church. It was where Pat Trimble is today. And they moved that. It was up at the end of the street. They moved it down. They lifted it over the wall. They didn't tear the wall down. They lifted it over the wall, wall was probably 4 foot high. They lifted it over the wall and set it in on the foundation of the Neubauer house. When they tore the Neubauer house down again, the Reeds were very instrumental in finding things to do with the woodwork. And so they found there was a lot of beautiful woodwork in that house that was torn down. It was a Georgian-style mansion with intramural gardens. And the house was torn down, but it had beautiful stained glass, leaded glass, and various pieces of the house is in various homes today around the area. The beautiful Borough building at Vanderbilt, if you've ever noticed a side window going up the side street, that window is a gorgeous window, and it was in the Neubauer house as well here in Dawson. So they didn't do like we do today. Today they just tear it down, smash it up, and burn it, but they did utilize a lot at that time. Now, Dickerson Run, as I said, it was kind of lost in the shuffle, I think. But the interesting part of Dickerson Run was Lower Dickerson Run, or what they call Lower Dickerson Run. And that was where the railroad yard, the P&L railroad yard was. And this was owned by Henry Galley, the land, a very large piece of land there. We have two of his descendants right here, Brian and his dad. And and they're members of our society. We're happy about that. But Henry was born in 1819, and he lived in the area. He was born in Lower Tyrone Township, and then he moved to Franklin Township on the site of the south of the Youghiogheny River. He was a well-read man. He deserved his knowledge. He remembered everything during his lifetime. He always was in need to help in schools, colleges. A very brilliant man, a very educated man. His monetary gifts gave a lot of people education in the area. Now, the Galley town had a number of houses, and when it was divided, Henry divided it into lots. And of course, this was, under the bridge at the time, because the bridge was over further than it is now. And so there was a general merchandising store. There was different businesses, blacksmithing, so on and so forth. There was also general merchandising where you could buy materials, things like that for sewing. My great-grandmother used to say that she sewed for the company of Coates and Clark's. And she did needlework and stuff like that for them. And so she would go over to Galleytown because they had the best threads and everything in the Coates and Clark department of their little store over there. The Galleytown, it was like a combination of stores. It was Black Store. Some of you people probably remember Black Store. I remember going into it, not down in Galleytown, but up on the top of the hill. And the Black Store was they had everything, and it was a very large store. And I still wonder, I sit and wonder sometimes when I come across the bridge, how they ever fit that large store in that very small space. Of course, I think things have shifted around somewhat, but it was truly a wonderful store. When the Galleytown was a fairly well built up town, and then the railroad came in 1872, and they wanted, or 1882 really, and they wanted more room. And by the time they got done, and they extinguished Galleytown, you might say, it was one of the largest railroad hubs in the system of the P&LE. It had a huge roundhouse, many, many engines in there, and so on and so forth. It was funny that the passengers, they didn't run as frequent as they did in later years, and so on and so forth. And I had mentioned one man that was in our society, and that was Mr. Come on, Mary Ellen. I'm sorry? Bill Levergood. Yeah, Bill Levergood. And it was Bill Levergood, and he was a senior in high school, and he wanted to go to Carnegie Mellon. Well, they didn't have the means to support him in Carnegie Mellon, but they they wanted to try. They wanted to see what they could do for him. And in the meantime, while he was getting ready for college, they were moving their house up to the top Maple Street, Dickerson Run from Galley town. And he lived there the rest of his life. He died in 2006. And he lived there with his sisters and his mom the rest of his life, but in the upper Dickerson Run. But nevertheless, he actually gave a lot of support, and he was you might say, a philanthropist of modern time. He gave our historical society a very sizable donation, the church over here, and so on and so forth. He was a metallurgist, and he was a very frugal man and a very dry humored man. He was, I would pick him up for Lions Club, and he would just be, telling stories and so on and so forth. I asked him one time, I said, Bill, why didn't you ever get married? I said, I saw your graduation picture there. You were a handsome man. And he said, well, there was never anybody good enough for my mother. So he said, I just forgot about it. So he got into Carnegie Mellon. But then it was the transport. He didn't have enough money to stay, so they was trying to find transportation or some way to get him back and forth. So the P&LE Railroad said he could ride down on the freight train, and he could jump off at Pittsburgh, and then they would keep going, and then they'd pick him up at night. So this is what he did to get his degree in metallurgy. He went every day. He went by train. He hopped on the train here. He also had to hop off the train while it was moving, coming back home because they didn't have a night stop. But he went by freight, and his mother went door to door selling chicken dinners all weekend, every weekend, for 4.5 years, so he got his degree. He was bound and determined to get the degree. And he was a wonderful man. And like I said, he's a philanthropist of our time because he was very, very good to the society, to all the areas I mentioned, like Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt bought their own, but Dickerson Run had no street lights before, and Dickerson Run he bought all the street lights for Dickerson Run. He paid the electric bill for 20 years. And so, and our society bought our lights, we kind of did that through our society. But so now all three towns are kind of matched up and paired off with this type of lighting. It's an interesting, Dickerson Run or Galley town was historically associated with Dickerson Run. But the thing is, it's really odd. He laid the land out, he developed it, turned it into a town, and then it became later, as it was decreasing, it became known as Dickerson Run, based on the old unincorporated community. And it's amazing to me, I just looked this up the other day, and Dickerson Run is an unincorporated community still yet today.
That house, would that be part of Galley town? In that picture there?
Yeah. You mean here?
Yes, right there.
Well, that's the railroad. That's railroad buildings there, but that's where it was.
Okay.
Like here, that's the river there, but it was down in here. Yeah. We do have a couple pictures of Galley town someplace. I don't know where they're at, but we do. But I was just kind of curious. Wonder how we could get them incorporated. Maybe they don't want to be. I don't know. They're a township, so I don't know how that would work. But nevertheless, we have a very interesting history in this area. We really do. And the Galley history, Brian, he was gracious enough to give us a copy. And it's like this thick. If you ever want to kill somebody, come down and get the book, because it is really thick. But it's very, very interesting. I just started to read it the other night, and I thought, there was so much, but there's nothing really about Galley town. It's about all the relatives or ancestors and so on. It goes back to 1400 or something like that. Yeah. It's very fascinating. So I think I'm going to try to find out more stuff about Galley town because it really piqued my interest. So this was rather short ad lib, but hopefully you got something out, a little message here. And maybe we could, I don't know if we're doing next week, are we doing, or not next month, are we doing one at Linden Hall?
October's Linden.
Oh, October. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's at Tyrone Schoolhouse in July.
Okay. Okay. So thank you very much for
Thank you.
listening to me gabble.